The mahogany conference table stretched like a battlefield between 23 men in navy suits, their voices a chorus of greed disguised as business acumen. I watched from the doorway of the 42nd floor, my reflection ghostly in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay. 10 years of hiding had taught me patience, but seeing my life's work auctioned off like garage sale trinkets made my blood simmer. The Blackwood Properties portfolio represents Miami's finest waterfront developments, announced the lead auctioneer, his Boston accent grating against my southern sensibilities. Starting bid for the South Beach collection is $40 million. My fingers traced the pearl necklace James had given me for our 25th anniversary, the one they'd buried with my empty casket. The irony wasn't lost on me. Catherine Blackwood, officially deceased since 2014, was about to crash her own estate sale. I stepped into the fluorescent battlefield. Gentlemen, my voice carried across the room like ice water on hot pavement. I believe you're selling something that doesn't belong to you. 23 heads turned in synchronized horror. The auctioneer's gavel froze mid-swing, but it was the faces at the head table that fed my soul. Tyler and Madison, my beautiful, treacherous twins, staring at their supposedly dead mother like she'd crawled from a Miami cemetery. Madison recovered first, her lawyer instincts kicking in. Security! Her voice cracked like a teenage boy's. This woman is clearly disturbed, am I? I pulled out my driver's license, passport, and the documents I'd spent 3 years preparing. Catherine Elizabeth Blackwood, born September 15, 1956. Social Security number 589678492. Very much alive. Despite what your fraudulent death certificate claims, Tyler's face had gone ashen. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, probably calling his attorney. Too late, sweetheart. I'd already contacted mine. You see, gentlemen, I continued, addressing the bewildered bidders, my children have been operating under a rather significant misconception. They believed dear old mom had passed away, leaving them free to manipulate their father into prison and liquidate our family's 40-year legacy. I smiled, feeling every year of exile in that expression. They were mistaken. The silence stretched like pulled taffy. Outside, Miami's skyline sparkled in the afternoon sun, the same view I'd gazed at from this office when I was building this empire brick by brick, deal by deal. Alongside my husband before these two vultures learned to walk, Madison found her voice. Mother, you're clearly confused. Dad's legal troubles are legitimate. The IRS investigation was manufactured by you two. I opened my briefcase, savoring their mounting panic. I've spent the last 18 months documenting every falsified document, every planted email, every lie you fed the media about your father's supposed tax evasion. 10 years ago, I'd fled James's increasingly violent temper and their indifference to our marriage's deterioration. Faking my death had seemed like the only escape from a life that had become a gilded prison. But watching from afar as my children destroyed everything we'd built, that required a resurrection. Tyler stood abruptly, his chair clattering backward. This is insane. You're supposed to be dead. Death, I replied, is highly overrated. Family betrayal, however, is exactly as devastating as advertised. I'd spent 3 years in Costa Rica, watching CNN reports about my grieving family. Another year in Switzerland, monitoring their systematic dismantling of James's reputation. Then 18 months gathering evidence from shadows, preparing for this moment when they'd finally overplay their hand. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should postpone? Oh, absolutely, I agreed. Especially since the FBI will want to examine every document before any sales proceed. Fraud investigations tend to complicate real estate transactions. Madison's facade finally cracked. You can't prove anything. You've been dead for 10 years. No court will what? Listen to a woman who documented her own children's conspiracy to imprison their father and steal his fortune? I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a video file. Care to watch yourself planting those files on Dad's computer? The nanny cam in his study captured everything beautifully. The room erupted in whispers. Several bidders edged toward the exits. My children's empire was crumbling in real time, and I was savoring every brick that fell. But this was just the opening act. 10 years of planning had taught me that true justice required patience, precision, and perfect timing. As I watched Tyler and Madison scramble for damage control, I knew the real reckoning was just beginning. The Phantom had returned, and hell was following with her. The Blackwood name first carved its mark into Miami's coastline in 1978, when James arrived from Georgia with nothing but a construction degree and stubborn Southern pride. I met him at a real estate seminar in Coral Gables, both of us 26 and hungry for the American dream that Florida promised in those days. Catherine Harper, I'd introduced myself, extending a firm handshake that matched his calloused palm. Even then, I understood that respect in this business came through competence, not charm. James had vision. He saw luxury condominiums where others saw swampland. I had the administrative skills to turn his dreams into legal documents, permits, and profit margins. Together we built Blackwood, properties from a one-room office on Flagler Street into Miami's premier waterfront development company. Our first project was a modest 12-unit complex in what's now prime South Beach real estate. James handled construction while I navigated Miami-Dade's labyrinthine permit process, learning to speak fluent bureaucrat with planning commissioners and city council members. We reinvested every penny back into land acquisition, living on beans and determination. By 1985, we owned 17 properties along the coast. By 1990, our signature glass towers were reshaping Miami's skyline. The Harper-Blackwood partnership had become Miami's power couple, featured on the cover of Florida Real Estate Weekly, with our twin toddlers playing at our feet. Those were the golden years, when Tyler and Madison were still innocent children, building sandcastles on our private beach in Key Biscayne. James would arrive home from construction sites covered in dust, scooping them up despite my protests about clean clothes. I'd watch from our kitchen window, managing 3 phone calls while dinner simmered, feeling like we'd conquered the world. Our Pinecrest mansion became the hub of Miami's real estate elite. Sunday barbecues brought together architects, contractors, city planners, and bankers who shaped South Florida's explosive growth. James would man the grill, while I orchestrated conversations that often resulted in Monday morning handshake deals worth millions. The children grew up understanding that success required sacrifice. Tyler showed early aptitude for numbers, often helping me review property assessments at the kitchen table. Madison displayed natural charm, winning over clients during office visits with her precocious questions about building heights and ocean views. We emphasized traditional values, hard work, family loyalty, and community responsibility. The Blackwood Foundation donated generously to Miami-Dade schools and hurricane relief efforts. We believed wealth carried obligations, that success meant lifting others alongside yourself. But prosperity bred different pressures. By 1995, Blackwood Properties managed $200 million in assets. The twins attended exclusive private schools in Coconut Grove, surrounded by trust fund children who'd never witnessed their parents' struggles. They learned to expect luxury, not appreciate it. James began working longer hours, driven by competition with national developers moving into our territory. I managed our expanding administrative empire. Lawyers, accountants, property managers, and city relationships that required constant attention. Family dinners became business meetings. Vacations turned into location scouting trips. The cracks started small. James's temper, once reserved for incompetent subcontractors, occasionally flared at home. Tyler's teenage rebellion manifested through expensive mistakes, crashed cars, suspended credit cards, private school scandals that required delicate handling. Madison learned manipulation early, playing parents against each other to achieve her desires. I told myself these were normal, wealthy family challenges. Every successful Miami family faced similar pressures. The Fontainebleaus dealt with their sons' gambling. The Brickles weathered their daughter's substance abuse. We'd navigate our difficulties through the same combination of resources and determination that built our empire. But success had changed us in ways I didn't recognize until much later. James increasingly viewed family relationships through transactional lenses. The twins learned to see wealth as entitlement rather than responsibility. I became so focused on managing everyone else's needs that I lost sight of my own disappearing happiness. By 2000, our marriage had become a business partnership with shared children and separate bedrooms. James's volatility escalated beyond professional frustration into personal cruelty. The twins, now college-aged, displayed concerning detachment from consequences, expecting parents to solve problems money could fix. I stayed because leaving seemed impossible. Blackwood Properties was as much mine as James's, built through 22 years of shared sacrifice. Our reputation in Miami's tight-knit development community meant divorce would damage both our businesses. Most importantly, I believed family loyalty meant enduring hardship for the greater good. The irony wasn't lost on me now. I'd spent decades building something beautiful, only to watch it corrupt the people I loved most. The empire we'd created to secure our children's future had instead destroyed their character, turning them into the very people we'd once pitied at those long-ago Sunday barbecues. Standing in that conference room yesterday, watching them auction off our life's work, I realized the true tragedy wasn't their betrayal. It was how completely I'd failed to recognize the monsters we'd raised in paradise. But understanding the problem was the first step towards solving it. Tyler and Madison emerged from childhood like twin sharks sensing blood in the water. By their 30th birthdays, both had earned MBAs from prestigious schools, Tyler from Wharton, Madison from Stanford Law, but their education had polished ambition into something harder and colder than James or I had ever possessed. Tyler joined Blackwood Properties as Vice President of Development in 2010, bringing Silicon Valley methodologies to our traditional Miami operation. He implemented efficiency algorithms that maximized profit margins while minimizing what he called emotional decision-making, his term for the community relationships I'd cultivated over decades. Mom, sentiment doesn't generate quarterly returns, he'd lecture during board meetings, his PowerPoint presentations filled with charts showing how my outdated networking approaches cost the company millions annually. These handshake deals with local contractors are bleeding us dry when we could outsource to national firms for 30% less. Madison established herself as our chief legal counsel, specializing in tax optimization strategies that pushed every regulation to its absolute limit. Her office walls displayed her Stanford diploma alongside photos of herself with Miami's political elite. Mayor Regalado, Governor Scott, Senator Rubio, connections she leveraged ruthlessly for favorable zoning decisions. Daddy, she'd purr during our increasingly tense family dinners at Joe's Stone Crab. Your old-school approaches leave millions on the table. Modern real estate requires aggressive tax planning that maximizes depreciation benefits and minimizes federal obligations. The twins' coordinated assault on our business philosophy became apparent during the 2012 fiscal year. They systematically replaced James's longtime employees with their own people, young, hungry professionals who shared their bottom-line mentality. Veterans like Marco Gutierrez, our foreman for 15 years, were suddenly redundant. Elena Rodriguez, my assistant since 1995, became inefficient. Their personal lives reflected the same calculated approach. Tyler married Stephanie Walsh, a hedge fund manager whose family owned significant Brickell Avenue properties. Madison's husband, David Chen, was a corporate attorney specializing in offshore investment vehicles. Both marriages seemed strategically designed to expand Blackwood Properties' influence rather than pursue genuine affection. The warning signs I'd ignored became impossible to dismiss. By 2013, Tyler's personal debts had mounted to alarming levels. A Ventura penthouse purchased for $3 million. A cigarette boat moored at Star Island. Collection of luxury cars that depreciated faster than his salary could support. He'd borrowed against his future inheritance repeatedly, treating Blackwood Properties like his personal ATM. Madison's lifestyle was equally extravagant, but more discreet. Her Coral Gables mansion featured a wine cellar worth more than most Miami homes. She collected contemporary art, spent weekends in the Hamptons, and maintained a wardrobe that cost more annually than I'd spent on clothes. In my first decade of marriage, both twins had developed the peculiar arrogance of inherited wealth. They spoke about their company despite contributing nothing to its creation, criticized James's conservative management style, while proposing increasingly risky ventures. and displayed shocking disregard for the employees who'd helped build their comfortable lives. First direct betrayal occurred during Hurricane Sandy's aftermath in late 2012, while James and I coordinated relief efforts for our damaged properties. The twins quietly approached several major investors about modernizing Blackwood Properties' leadership structure. They presented themselves as the dynamic young executives ready to take the company public, positioning their father as an aging obstacle to growth. The old man's lost his edge, Tyler told potential investors during secret meetings at the Four Seasons. I learned about these conversations months later through loyal employees who'd overheard the presentations. Madison and I have the vision to transform this regional operation into a national powerhouse. Madison's approach was more sophisticated but equally treacherous. She began questioning James's tax filings during board meetings, suggesting his outdated accounting methods might attract IRS scrutiny. Her concerns seemed legitimate on the surface, a caring daughter protecting her father from potential legal problems. But I recognized the manipulation beneath her performance. "Daddy, these depreciation schedules look aggressive," she'd say. Reviewing documents, she'd actually prepared herself. "Are you sure your accountant understands current federal regulations? Maybe we should bring in a specialist to review everything." The twins' coordinated campaign intensified after my staged death in 2014. Without me present to challenge their narratives, they convinced James that his grief was affecting his judgment. They hired Dr. Patricia Mendez, a psychiatrist who specialized in executive capacity evaluations, ostensibly to help James process his loss. Dr. Mendez's sessions became opportunities for the twins to document their father's supposed mental decline. They recorded conversations where James, devastated by my apparent death, made emotional decisions about memorial contributions and property dedications. Later, they'd present these recordings as evidence of diminished capacity requiring family intervention. By 2015, Tyler and Madison had effectively isolated James from longtime business associates, replaced key employees with their allies, and positioned themselves as Blackwood Properties' de facto leadership. They convinced him to sign updated corporate documents that expanded their authority while diminishing his control. The final phase of their plan became clear through surveillance footage I'd obtained from our old Coconut Grove offices. In late 2023, they'd systematically planted false documentation on James's computer, fabricated emails suggesting offshore tax evasion, altered financial records indicating unreported income, and forged communications with supposed tax haven consultants. Their scheme was breathtakingly audacious: frame their own father for federal crimes, force his imprisonment or house arrest, then liquidate Blackwood Properties' assets before any investigation could expose their manipulation. They'd calculated that by the time truth emerged, they'd be safely residing in non-extradition countries, with hundreds of millions in untraceable accounts. Watching those security videos from my Swiss exile, I felt a peculiar mixture of admiration and horror. My children had inherited our entrepreneurial intelligence, but they'd perverted it into something monstrous. They were brilliant, efficient, and completely without conscience. Everything James and I had accidentally taught them to become. The beauty of Tyler and Madison's scheme lay in its methodical patience. They didn't rush James toward destruction. They guided him there with the gentle persistence of concerned children, protecting an aging parent from his own poor judgment. From my monitoring post in Geneva, I watched their psychological warfare unfold through carefully placed surveillance devices I'd installed before my departure. The twins had transformed our family's weekly dinners at the Biltmore into therapeutic interventions disguised as social gatherings. "Dad, we're worried about you," Madison would begin, her voice honeyed with false concern as she cut her stone crab claws. "You seem confused about the Fontainebleau project details. Maybe we should have Dr. Mendez review your medications again." Tyler's approach was more direct, but equally insidious. "Pop, I found some irregularities in the Georgetown property files. Nothing serious, but the accountants are asking questions. We should probably bring in outside auditors to clean everything up before the IRS starts sniffing around." James, still devastated by my supposed death, accepted their guidance with heartbreaking gratitude. His grief had made him vulnerable to manipulation, eager to lean on children who suddenly seemed mature and responsible. He couldn't see that their concern was performative, designed to establish patterns of documented incompetence. The twins' strategy required multiple witnesses to James's apparent decline. They arranged social situations where he'd appear confused or forgetful, then ensured prominent Miami figures observed his struggles. Golf outings at Doral became opportunities to showcase his memory lapses. Charity events at the Perez Art Museum featured James making statements that seemed increasingly disconnected from reality. Poor James. I heard Patricia Estefan whisper to her husband during a March 2024 fundraiser, unaware that I was monitoring the conversation remotely. He's clearly not handling Catherine's death well. Thank goodness Tyler and Madison are stepping up to manage the business. The documentation phase began in earnest during summer 2024. Madison hired a private investigation firm ostensibly to protect family assets from potential scammers targeting grieving widowers, but actually to create an official record of James's supposed mental instability. The investigators' reports described a man making irrational financial decisions and displaying concerning detachment from business realities. Meanwhile, Tyler implemented new corporate procedures that gradually stripped James of meaningful authority. Every major decision required family consultation, which meant the twins could override their father's judgment while appearing responsible and protective. Bank accounts needed dual signatures. Property sales required board approval. Even routine maintenance contracts had to pass through Tyler's efficiency algorithms. "We're just protecting you, Dad," Tyler explained during one particularly manipulative conversation I'd recorded. "Remember what happened to the Fontaines when old Jacques started making bad deals? We won't let that happen to our family." The digital evidence planting began in September 2024. Madison's husband David provided sophisticated software that could backdate documents and emails, making fabricated evidence appear legitimate to casual examination. They created an elaborate paper trail suggesting James had been systematically evading federal taxes for decades, hiding income through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The forged emails were masterpieces of subtle incrimination. They referenced offshore accounts that James allegedly controlled, mentioned meetings with tax haven consultants he'd supposedly hired, and discussed strategies for concealing assets from IRS oversight. The twins even created fake social media profiles for fictional financial advisors, complete with years of backdated posts establishing their credibility. Dr. Mendez's psychological evaluations provided the medical justification for their intervention. Her reports documented James's increasing paranoia about federal investigation, his obsessive concern with tax compliance, and his delusional belief that family members might be manipulating his affairs. Every symptom of his awareness of their scheme became evidence of his mental deterioration. The legal framework took shape through Madison's careful manipulation of Florida's guardianship laws. She established grounds for declaring James mentally incompetent, citing his medical records, psychological evaluations, and the growing evidence of his supposed criminal activity. Her plan would allow the family to assume control of his affairs while he faced federal prosecution. The timeline accelerated in late 2024 when the twins learned about pending changes to federal tax enforcement that might complicate their scheme. They needed to trigger James's downfall before new regulations made their fabricated evidence more difficult to sustain under scrutiny. Tyler arranged for an anonymous tip to the IRS about suspicious activity in Blackwood properties. Financial records. The tip included copies of the forged documentation they'd planted, presented as evidence from a concerned employee who feared retaliation for whistleblowing. Within weeks, federal agents were requesting extensive financial records for audit. James's panic at the investigation played perfectly into their narrative. His desperate attempts to understand the accusations appeared to confirm his guilty knowledge of the supposed crimes. His confusion about offshore accounts he'd never opened seemed like obvious deflection. His anger at the accusations looked like the rage of a caught criminal. "I don't understand how this happened," James confided to Father Rodriguez at St. Augustine Catholic Church, unaware that Madison had arranged for the conversation to be recorded through confessional surveillance she'd illegally installed. Catherine always handled the complex financial arrangements. Without her, I can't make sense of these IRS documents. The twins used his admission as further evidence of his incompetence and potential criminal liability. They told investigators that their father had relied too heavily on their deceased mother's expertise, suggesting he might have unknowingly participated in schemes she'd designed to evade taxes. By January 2025, the trap was fully loaded. James faced mounting federal pressure, increasing medical documentation of mental decline, and growing evidence of financial crimes he'd never committed. The twins had positioned themselves as reluctant heroes protecting both their father and the family business from his destructive decisions. They scheduled the asset liquidation for March 2025, calculating that 6 weeks would provide sufficient time to convert properties into cash and transfer funds to untraceable accounts. Their plan accounted for every variable except one: the possibility that their supposedly dead mother might return to dismantle their elaborate construction of lies. From Switzerland, I watched their masterpiece near completion with grudging admiration and bottomless fury. They'd inherited our business intelligence but perverted it into something monstrous, a precision instrument of family destruction that would have impressed Machiavelli himself. The breakthrough came through James's own paranoia, though he never realized how right his instincts were. In February 2025, desperate to understand the mounting accusations against him, he hired Rebecca Martinez, a forensic accountant specializing in IRS defense cases. What he thought would clear his name instead provided me with the smoking gun I needed. Rebecca's preliminary examination revealed digital fingerprints that the twins had been too arrogant to properly conceal. The fabricated offshore account documents contained metadata showing they'd been created on Madison's personal laptop, despite supposedly originating from Cayman Islands banks months earlier. The forged emails included IP address traces leading directly to Tyler's Aventura penthouse. Mr. Blackwood, Rebecca explained during their March 3rd meeting, which I monitored through devices I'd placed in James's Star Island study. These documents have been digitally manipulated. The timestamps don't match the server logs, and several files show evidence of recent creation designed to appear historical. James's confusion was heartbreaking to witness. But Tyler said the IRS found these in our corporate servers. Madison confirmed they were part of Catherine's old filing system. Sir, with respect, someone has been systematically planting evidence in your business records. This isn't accidental. It's deliberate fraud designed to implicate you in crimes you didn't commit. Rebecca's discovery triggered my decision to accelerate my own timeline. I'd been planning to remain hidden until the twins completed their scheme, gathering evidence of their full conspiracy before revealing myself. But watching James suffer under accusations I knew were false proved unbearable. From my Geneva apartment, I began activating resources I'd cultivated during 10 years of supposed death. My Swiss banker, Klaus Hoffmann, had maintained several accounts under Catherine Harper, my maiden, series that contained documentation of every significant Blackwood Properties transaction since 1978. These records would prove the offshore accounts were fabrications, since I'd personally managed all legitimate international investments. My next call went to Antonio Ruiz, a private investigator who'd worked discreetly for Miami's elite families for over 20 years. Antonio owed me a considerable favor. I'd helped his daughter secure a scholarship to University of Miami when immigration status complicated her college applications. His surveillance network could document the twins' activities in ways that would satisfy federal prosecutors. Catherine. Antonio's voice carried shock and genuine warmth when I contacted him. My God, we all thought. The funeral was beautiful. Your children spoke so movingly about your memory. I'm sure they did. Now I need you to help me expose them for what they really are. Antonio's investigation moved quickly. Within a week, he'd documented Tyler's secret meetings with potential investors, Madison's coordination with offshore banking consultants, and both twins' systematic replacement of loyal Blackwood employees with their own associates. More damning, He captured video evidence of them accessing James's computer to plant additional fabricated documents. The digital evidence was devastating. Antonio's team recovered deleted files from the twins' personal devices, showing their detailed timeline for framing James, liquidating company assets and transferring funds to accounts they'd established in countries without extradition treaties. They'd even drafted resignation letters for James to sign once his imprisonment became inevitable. But the most chilling discovery was Madison's psychological manipulation manual, a detailed study she'd commissioned on exploiting grief-induced vulnerability in elderly relatives. The document analyzed successful cases of adult children assuming control of family wealth through manufactured mental health crises. It read like a blueprint for psychological warfare against parents. Tyler's financial records revealed the scope of their desperation. His debts exceeded $4 million, secured against property he didn't legally own, and investments that had collapsed during the pandemic. His creditors included several individuals with questionable reputations, the kind of people who expected repayment regardless of legal niceties. Madison's situation was more sophisticated but equally dire. She'd invested heavily in cryptocurrency schemes that promised extraordinary returns, but delivered spectacular losses. Her art collection, purchased with borrowed money, had depreciated significantly when the contemporary market collapsed. Her husband David's law firm faced federal investigation for helping clients evade taxes through illegal offshore arrangements. The twins weren't just greedy, they were desperate. Their elaborate scheme against James represented their only viable escape from mounting debts and looming legal troubles. They'd calculated that liquidating Blackwood properties would generate enough cash to disappear permanently while leaving their father to face consequences for crimes they'd fabricated. My research into Dr. Mendez revealed another layer of corruption. The psychiatrist specialized in providing favorable evaluations for wealthy families seeking to control elderly relatives' assets. Her reports consistently documented mental decline in patients whose children needed legal justification for assuming financial authority. She'd helped orchestrate similar schemes across Miami's elite community for over a decade. The paper trail led to a broader conspiracy involving corrupt officials in Miami-Dade's probate system. Judge Patricia Alvarez, who would oversee James's competency hearing, had received substantial campaign contributions from firms connected to Madison's husband. The court-appointed guardian who would manage James's affairs was Tyler's former college roommate. By mid-March, possessed evidence of systematic fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, and corruption that implicated dozens of individuals across Miami's legal and medical establishments. The twins hadn't just betrayed their family, they'd corrupted an entire network of professionals to facilitate their scheme. But evidence alone wouldn't save James from the immediate crisis. The IRS investigation was proceeding based on fabricated documents that appeared legitimate to federal agents who lacked the context to recognize their artificial nature. Each day brought him closer to indictment for crimes that existed only in his children's imagination. The asset liquidation was scheduled for March 21st, just 18 days after Rebecca's discovery. The twins had accelerated their timeline, perhaps sensing that their scheme was becoming vulnerable to exposure. They'd already transferred several properties to shell corporations they controlled, claiming the moves were necessary to protect assets from potential federal seizure. James's deteriorating mental state provided tragic irony to their psychological manipulation. The stress of false accusations and mounting legal pressure was genuinely affecting his cognitive function, creating real symptoms that validated their fabricated concerns about his competence. Their lies were becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. Standing in my Geneva apartment, reviewing the mountain of evidence I'd assembled, I felt the weight of 10 years' preparation converging into a single moment of reckoning. My children had become monsters, but they were still my children. The empire James and I built was being destroyed, but it was still our life's work. My flight from Geneva landed at Miami International Airport on March 18th at 6:47 a.m., 3 days before the scheduled liquidation. 10 years of careful planning had taught me that timing was everything. Arrive too early, and the twins might adjust their strategy. Too late, and irreversible damage would be done to both James and our Legacy, the woman who stepped off that Swiss Air flight, bore little resemblance to the Catherine Blackwood who'd supposedly drowned off Key Biscayne in 2014. Subtle, cosmetic surgery had refined my features without dramatically altering my appearance. My hair, now silver white instead of chestnut brown, was styled in a sophisticated bob that suggested European elegance. Designer glasses and carefully chosen clothing created an image of understated wealth that would blend seamlessly into Miami's international community. My first stop was a nondescript office building in Coral Gables, where Robert Chen, no relation to Madison's husband, maintained his boutique law practice specializing in complex fraud cases. Robert had built his reputation defending executives in white-collar prosecutions, but his real expertise lay in offensive strategies that turned tables on sophisticated criminals. Mrs. Blackwood, Robert greeted me with the calm professionalism I'd appreciated during our encrypted communications over the past 6 months. Your documentation package is extraordinary. I've rarely seen fraud evidence this comprehensive or damning. Robert's conference room walls displayed degrees from Harvard Law School and commendations from the Florida Bar Association. But more importantly, they showed photographs of successful cases against precisely the kind of criminals my children had become. His client list included several Miami families who'd survived similar internal betrayals. The challenge, Robert explained, spreading my evidence across his mahogany table, isn't proving their guilt. That's straightforward. The challenge is timing our revelations to minimize damage to your husband while maximizing consequences for Tyler and Madison. We reviewed the legal strategy I'd developed during months of Swiss exile. The federal prosecutors handling James's case would need to see evidence of evidence tampering before proceeding with indictments based on fabricated documents. The Miami-Dade probate court would require proof of conspiracy before allowing competency proceedings to continue. The IRS would need documentation showing how their investigation had been manipulated through false tips and planted evidence. The beauty of their scheme, Robert observed, is also its fatal weakness. They've created such elaborate documentation that proving fabrication will be relatively straightforward once we demonstrate the digital fingerprints and timeline inconsistencies. My second appointment was with Maria Santos, a cybersecurity expert who'd worked with the FBI's cybercrime division before establishing her private consulting firm. Maria's specialty was analyzing digital evidence in cases involving sophisticated document forgery, exactly the expertise needed to demolish Tyler and Madison's carefully constructed lies. These metadata trails are amateur hour, Maria declared after examining the files Antonio Ruiz had recovered from the twins' computers. They used standard software without proper steganographic concealment. Any competent forensic examination would expose the manipulation immediately. Maria's analysis would provide the technical foundation for Robert's legal strategy. Her report documented not just the existence of digital manipulation, but the specific methods and timeline the twins had used to create their fabricated evidence. More importantly, she'd identified additional evidence still hidden on their personal devices that could be recovered through properly executed search warrants. The afternoon brought my most emotionally challenging meeting. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a geriatric psychiatrist with 30 years' experience, had agreed to evaluate James's true mental state and expose Dr. Mendez's fraudulent assessments. Elena's reputation for clinical integrity had made her unpopular with families seeking convenient diagnoses, but invaluable for cases requiring absolute honesty. Based on the records you've provided, Elena explained in her modest Kendall office, your husband is experiencing situational stress and grief-related cognitive impact, but he shows no signs of the dementia or incompetence Dr. Mendez has documented. Her evaluations appear designed to support predetermined conclusions rather than reflect clinical reality. Elena's willingness to challenge Dr. Mendez professionally was crucial for James's defense. Her testimony would expose the corruption that enabled the twins' scheme while providing medical justification for dismissing the competency proceedings that threatened his freedom. The final piece of my preparation involved financial reconstruction. Klaus Hoffman had flown from Geneva to Miami, bringing documentation that would prove the offshore accounts allegedly controlled by James were actually elaborate fabrications. His Swiss banking expertise would demonstrate how real international investments differed from the fake accounts Tyler and Madison had created. The fictional accounts they've attributed to your husband, Klaus explained during our evening meeting at the Four Seasons, contain several technical errors that no legitimate Swiss bank would permit. The account numbers follow patterns that don't exist in our system, and the transaction codes reference procedures that were discontinued years before the supposed account openings. Klaus's testimony would provide international credibility to our defense while exposing the twins' ignorance about genuine offshore banking procedures. His presence would also demonstrate that legitimate international investments, unlike the fabricated accounts, involved extensive documentation and regulatory compliance that the twins had failed to replicate convincingly. March 19th. My team was fully assembled and our strategy completely prepared. Robert had coordinated with federal prosecutors, providing preliminary evidence that would pause James's investigation pending examination of new information. Maria had prepared forensic reports that would demolish the digital evidence supporting the IRS case. Elena had documented the medical fraud that invalidated competency proceedings. Klaus had assembled financial proof that the offshore allegations were complete fabrications. The twins remained unaware of my presence in Miami, focused on final preparations for their asset liquidation. Their overconfidence had become a tactical advantage. They weren't watching for threats they believed impossible. A dead woman couldn't expose their crimes, challenge their authority, or protect the man they were destroying. On March 20th, I visited James's grave, my own grave, in Woodlawn Cemetery. The headstone bore an inscription Tyler had chosen, "Beloved wife and mother, forever in our hearts." The irony of reading my own epitaph while preparing to resurrect myself was not lost on me. Standing there among Miami's departed elite, I felt the weight of 10 years' sacrifice and planning converging into tomorrow's reckoning. My children had betrayed everything James and I had built, corrupted everyone we'd trusted, and destroyed the man I'd loved for over 40 years. But they'd made one fatal miscalculation. They'd assumed death was permanent and family loyalty was finite. Tomorrow, they would learn that mothers never truly die, and that some betrayals demand resurrection to achieve justice. The Phantom was ready to reclaim her life. The 42nd floor conference room at 1 Biscayne Tower had hosted many significant moments in Miami's real estate history, but nothing quite like what transpired at 2:15 p.m. on March 21st, 2025. 23 potential buyers, 3 auctioneers, and a collection of lawyers representing various interests had gathered to witness the liquidation of Blackwood Properties' crown jewels. Tyler stood at the room's head, commanding attention in his Navy Armani suit, displaying the confidence of a man who believed he'd successfully orchestrated the perfect crime. Madison sat at his right, her legal documents arranged precisely, ready to execute property transfers that would convert 47 years of family legacy into untraceable cash. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lead auctioneer announced, his Boston accent carrying across the room's polished surfaces, "we're pleased to present the Blackwood Collection, Miami's most prestigious waterfront properties, available for immediate acquisition." I entered during his opening remarks, my heels clicking against Italian marble with the precision of a metronome. The conversations didn't stop immediately. Wealthy men conducting business rarely notice individual arrivals. But as I moved toward the conference table, a peculiar silence began spreading through the room like ripples on still water. Tyler noticed first. His practiced sales smile froze mid-gesture as his eyes fixed on my face. I watched recognition dawn slowly, disbelief wrestling with impossible reality. His hand trembled as he reached for his water glass, missing it entirely and knocking over the crystal tumbler. "Excuse me," Tyler stammered, his voice cracking like a 13-year-old boy's. "There's been some mistake. This is a private auction." "Oh, I don't think there's any mistake." I placed my Hermes bag on the table with deliberate care, enjoying the absolute silence that had descended on the room. though there have been quite a few lies told recently. Madison's lawyer instincts kicked in faster than her brother's shock. She stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward into the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Security!" she called, though her voice carried more panic than authority. "This woman is clearly disturbed and needs to be removed immediately." I smiled at my daughter's desperation, remembering when she'd used similar tactics as a teenager caught breaking curfew. Disturbed? Perhaps. But I'm quite definitely Catherine. Elizabeth Blackwood, and I believe you're attempting to sell my property without my consent. The room erupted in whispers. Several bidders pulled out phones, presumably to verify what they were witnessing. The auctioneer shuffled his papers nervously, clearly uncertain whether to continue his presentation or flee the building. "This is impossible," Tyler whispered, his face draining of color. "You're dead. We buried you. There was a funeral." Was there? I opened my briefcase, removing documents with theatrical precision. Because according to my Swiss bank records, Catherine Harper has been very much alive and actively managing international investments for the past 10 years. Madison found her voice, though it wavered with barely controlled hysteria. "Mother, you're obviously confused. Perhaps the trauma of your survival has affected your memory. Dad's legal troubles are legitimate. The IRS investigation was manufactured by you two." I spread forensic reports across the conference table, each page a nail in their elaborate coffin. "I've spent the last 18 months documenting every forged email, every planted document, every lie you've fed to federal investigators about your father's supposed criminal activity." The silence stretched unbearably. Outside, Miami's skyline sparkled in the afternoon sun, indifferent to the family drama unfolding in this corporate battlefield. Inside, 23 potential buyers were witnessing the collapse of what they'd believed was a routine asset acquisition. Tyler attempted one final denial. "This is insane. Even if you're somehow alive, you can't prove anything. These documents could be fabricated, could they?" I pulled out my phone, selecting a video file I'd saved for this exact moment. "Care. To watch yourself planting fabricated tax documents on Dad's computer." The hidden camera in his study captured everything beautifully. The room's atmosphere shifted perceptibly as the reality of fraud investigation replaced simple estate liquidation. Several bidders edged toward the exits, unwilling to associate themselves with criminal proceedings. The auctioneers huddled together, discussing cancellation procedures in urgent whispers. Madison's professional facade finally cracked completely. "You can't do this. You've been legally dead for 10 years. No court will accept testimony from someone who faked their own death. Won't they?" I gestured toward the conference room doors, where Robert Chen was entering with 2 FBI agents and a Miami-Dade detective. "Agent Patricia Morrison. This is Special Agent James Conway from the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division. They're very interested in examining the evidence you've both been creating." Tyler's legs gave out entirely. He collapsed into his chair, staring at the federal agents with the expression of a man watching his world disintegrate in real time. Madison grabbed the table's edge for support, her knuckles white against the polished wood. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Morrison announced to the room, "this auction is hereby suspended pending federal investigation into fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy charges. We'll need statements from all participants before anyone leaves the building." The bidders' reaction was immediate and predictable. Chairs scraped against marble as wealthy men who'd come to acquire prestigious properties instead found themselves potential witnesses in a federal case. Cell phones appeared everywhere as they contacted lawyers, assistants, and public relations firms to manage their unexpected involvement in scandal. I watched my children's empire collapse with the satisfaction of a demolition expert, admiring perfectly placed charges. 10 years of planning, 6 months of evidence gathering, and 3 days of tactical preparation had converged into this moment of absolute victory. But as Tyler buried his face in his hands and Madison stared at me with undisguised hatred, I felt an unexpected pang of maternal grief. These were still the children I'd raised, the babies I'd rocked to sleep, the teenagers I'd worried about during their first dates. Their corruption didn't erase my love. It complicated it beyond easy resolution. "Agent Conway," I said, turning toward the federal investigator, "I believe you'll find sufficient evidence in my briefcase to demonstrate that James Blackwood is the victim of an elaborate conspiracy rather than the perpetrator of tax evasion." The agent nodded grimly. "Mrs. Blackwood, we appreciate your cooperation. Your preliminary evidence package was quite compelling." Tyler looked up from his hands, his eyes red with tears or rage. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you just stay dead?" I met his gaze directly, feeling the weight of 4 decades of motherhood in that moment. "Because family means protecting the people you love, even when they don't deserve it. You forgot that lesson somewhere along the way." The Phantom had reclaimed her flesh, and justice was finally beginning. The FBI's Miami field office buzzed with activity as Agent Conway's team processed the evidence I'd spent 10 years gathering. By 6 p.m. on March 21st, federal agents had executed search warrants on Tyler and Madison's homes, their offices, and every electronic device connected to their conspiracy. The digital forensics results were devastating. Maria Santos's analysis revealed over 300 fabricated documents created between September 2024 and March 2025, each one designed to implicate James in progressively more serious financial crimes. The twins had built an elaborate digital fiction that would have fooled anyone lacking the technical expertise to examine metadata and file creation patterns. "Mrs. Blackwood," Agent Morrison explained in the sterile conference room where I was providing my statement, "your children created one of the most sophisticated family fraud schemes we've encountered. The coordination between document fabrication, medical manipulation, and legal exploitation required months of planning and considerable technical sophistication." Tyler's financial records told a story of desperation that explained their timeline acceleration. His creditors included individuals with connections to organized crime figures who expected repayment, regardless of legal niceties. Madison's cryptocurrency losses had wiped out her children's college funds and her retirement accounts. Together, they faced over $8 million in debts that their Blackwood property salaries couldn't service. The corruption network they'd assembled was equally impressive and damning. Dr. Mendez had provided fraudulent mental health evaluations for 17 elderly Miami residents over the past 5 years, enabling family members to assume control of assets worth over $400 million. Judge Alvarez had approved guardianship appointments in suspicious circumstances that netted her campaign fund substantial contributions from grateful families. "We're looking at potential RICO charges," Agent Conway informed me during a briefing session. This wasn't isolated fraud. It was systematic exploitation of Miami's probate system involving multiple professionals across several years. James's release from house arrest required careful coordination with federal prosecutors who'd built their case on fabricated evidence. Rebecca Martinez's forensic accounting had already raised questions about the IRS Investigations Foundation, but my documentation provided definitive proof that the entire case was constructed from lies. Dr. Elena Vasquez's psychological evaluation of James revealed the true extent of damage the twins had inflicted. His cognitive function, while stressed by false accusations and legal pressure, showed no signs of the dementia Dr. Mendez had documented. However, the psychological trauma of believing his children thought him mentally incompetent had created genuine depression requiring professional treatment. "Your husband is experiencing what we call induced psychological distress," Dr. Vasquez explained during our consultation. "The systematic gaslighting and betrayal by his children has created symptoms that appeared to validate their claims about his mental state. It's a particularly cruel form of abuse." The asset recovery process began immediately. Robert Chen had obtained court orders freezing all Blackwood Properties accounts and reversing property transfers the twins had executed during the past 6 months. The shell corporations they'd created to hide stolen assets were revealed as transparent vehicles for money laundering. Klaus Hoffman's Swiss banking expertise proved invaluable for unraveling their offshore schemes. The fictional accounts they'd attributed to James contained technical errors that exposed them as amateur fabrications, while the legitimate international investments I'd managed for decades provided clear contrast between real and manufactured evidence. The irony, Klaus observed during our evening debriefing at the Mandarin Oriental, is that they could have simply inherited everything legally within a few years. Their father is 73 years old with a valid will, leaving them substantial portions of the estate. Their impatience cost them everything. Media coverage exploded across Miami's social scene as news of the arrests spread through country clubs, charity organizations, and business networks where the Blackwood name carried weight. The Miami Herald's headline read, "Dead Wife Returns to Expose Children's Conspiracy," while the Business Journal focused on the real estate implications. Blackwood Properties fraud rocks Miami development community. Tyler and Madison's arrest photos showed two people who'd aged decades in a single day. Tyler's confident executive appearance had crumbled into the haunted expression of a man confronting inevitable imprisonment. Madison's legal training provided no defense against federal prosecutors, armed with irrefutable evidence of her systematic fraud. Their children, my grandchildren, required immediate protection from the scandal consuming their parents. Jessica, Tyler's 16-year-old daughter, and Michael, Madison's 14-year-old son, had been attending private schools where their family name was suddenly toxic. I arranged for them to stay with James's sister in Tampa until the immediate crisis passed. "Grandma Catherine," Jessica whispered when I called to explain the situation. She'd been 6 when I'd staged my death, old enough to remember me, but young enough to believe the official story. "I thought you were dead." "I was never dead, sweetheart. I was just away, but I'm back now. And I'm going to make sure you and Michael are protected from all this ugliness." The corporate restructuring of Blackwood Properties required delicate navigation of legal requirements and business realities. The twins had signed numerous contracts and commitments that needed honoring, despite their criminal prosecution. I worked with Robert Chen to establish temporary management that could operate the company while longer-term governance was determined. James's emotional recovery proved more complex than the legal and financial restoration. 10 years of believing I was dead, followed by months of false accusations and family betrayal, had left him psychologically fragile despite his relief at vindication. Our first face-to-face conversation since 2014 took place in Dr. Vasquez's office, with professional mediation to manage the emotional intensity. "Catherine," he whispered when I entered the consultation room, his voice breaking with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you forever. Then I thought I was losing my mind. Now I don't know what's real anymore." "I'm real," I replied, taking his hand carefully. "Our love was real. Our life together was real. What Tyler and Madison did to you, that was the lie." The twins' sentencing hearing was scheduled for August 2025, giving federal prosecutors time to unravel the full extent of their conspiracy. Early plea negotiations suggested both would face substantial prison terms, possibly 10 to 15 years, along with complete restitution for stolen assets and legal costs. Sitting in my restored office on the 42nd floor of One Biscayne Tower, looking out at the Miami skyline James and I had helped shape over 4 decades, I felt the weight of resurrection settling into my bones. I'd reclaimed my identity, saved my husband, and destroyed my children's criminal enterprise. But victory carried unexpected burdens. The empire we'd built was intact, but the family that created it was irreparably damaged. My children would spend years in federal prison, their reputations destroyed, their futures obliterated. My grandchildren would grow up knowing their parents had tried to destroy their grandfather. The phantom had become flesh again, but the cost of resurrection was higher than I'd anticipated. 3 months after my resurrection, the Blackwood family estate felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, as James and I attempted to rebuild what Tyler and Madison had systematically destroyed. The Star Island mansion where we'd raised our children now served as headquarters for reconstructing both our business empire and our fractured relationships. Dr. Vasquez's family therapy sessions became our weekly anchor, providing professional guidance for navigating the complex emotions surrounding betrayal, forgiveness, and reconstruction. James struggled most with reconciling his love for Tyler and Madison with their calculated cruelty toward him. "They're still our children," he'd repeat during our Thursday evening sessions, his voice heavy with confusion and grief. "How do we love people who tried to destroy us?" "Love doesn't require trust," Dr. Vasquez explained with the patience of someone who'd guided many families through similar traumas. "You can maintain parental love while acknowledging that your children made choices that harmed you. Irreparably, the corporate governance of Blackwood properties required complete restructuring to prevent future internal betrayals. Robert Chen worked with business consultants to establish safeguards ensuring no single family member could manipulate company operations for personal benefit. Board independence, external audits, and transparency requirements would protect against another conspiracy. Our 16-year-old granddaughter Jessica had been living with James's sister in Tampa, but she asked to return to Miami in June. Her adjustment to learning about my survival and her parents' imprisonment required delicate handling from child psychologists specializing in family trauma. I remember you telling bedtime stories about princesses who disappeared but always came back. Jessica confided during one of our early conversations in the mansion's garden. "Did you plan this whole thing like a fairy tale?" "Not exactly like a fairy tale, sweetheart. Real life is messier than stories, and sometimes good people make terrible choices that hurt everyone they love." Michael, Madison's 14-year-old son, proved more resistant to reconciliation. His anger at his mother's imprisonment focused primarily on me, viewing my resurrection as the catalyst for his family's destruction. His therapy sessions with Dr. Vasquez addressed his conflicted loyalties between loving his mother and acknowledging her crimes. Grandma Catherine ruined everything, he'd declared. During a particularly difficult family meeting, Mom and Dad were just trying to protect Grandpa James from making bad decisions. "Michael," I replied carefully, "your mother planted false evidence to send your grandfather to prison. That wasn't protection. That was betrayal." The legal proceedings continued throughout the summer as federal prosecutors built comprehensive cases against Tyler, Madison, and their co-conspirators. Dr. Mendez pleaded guilty to medical fraud charges in exchange for cooperation against other professionals in the corruption network. Judge Alvarez faced judicial misconduct hearings that would likely end her career. Tyler's plea negotiations revealed the depth of his psychological deterioration during the months leading to his arrest. His gambling debts had escalated beyond simple financial pressure into threats against his family's safety. Madison's cryptocurrency investments had been recommended by individuals now under investigation for operating Ponzi schemes targeting wealthy professionals. They weren't evil, Agent Morrison explained during a victim impact consultation. They were desperate people who made increasingly dangerous choices until crime seemed like their only option. It doesn't excuse their actions, but it helps explain how they rationalized betraying their family. James's recovery accelerated once he understood the full scope of manipulation he'd endured. Physical therapy helped restore strength lost during months of stress-induced health problems. Cognitive exercises with neuropsychologists confirmed that his mental faculties were intact despite Dr. Mendez's fraudulent evaluations. Our marriage reconstruction proved more complex than business or legal restoration. 10 years of separation, followed by months of trauma, had changed both of us in ways that required careful navigation. Couples therapy with Dr. Vasquez addressed not just recent events, but underlying issues that had contributed to our problems before my staged death. "Catherine, your decision to fake your death rather than pursue divorce suggests you felt trapped with no viable alternatives," Dr. Vasquez observed during one particularly intense session. "James, your wife felt so unsafe in your marriage that she chose to disappear rather than confront problems directly." James's acknowledgement of his past behavior was painful but necessary for moving forward. His anger issues, while never physically violent, had created emotional abuse that made me feel powerless in our relationship. My decision to disappear rather than fight had deprived him of opportunities to address problems he hadn't fully recognized. "I drove you away," he admitted during a walk along South Beach where we'd spent our early dating years. "Then I spent 10 years grieving someone who left because I made her feel unsafe. How do we come back from that? Carefully, I replied, watching waves crash against the shore where Miami's skyline reflected in ocean spray. One conversation at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. The community response to our family's scandal varied dramatically across Miami's social strata. Business associates who'd known us for decades offered support and understanding, recognizing that we were victims rather than perpetrators. Social acquaintances from country clubs and charity circuits proved less generous, viewing our drama as entertainment rather than tragedy. Rebecca Fontaine, whose family had faced similar internal betrayals during the 1990s, became an unexpected source of guidance and friendship. Her experience navigating public scandal while maintaining business operations provided practical advice for managing media attention and protecting grandchildren from excessive scrutiny. The hardest part, Rebecca shared during lunch at the Coral Gables Country Club, is learning that some relationships were never as strong as you believed. But the people who stand by you during crisis, those connections become deeper than anything you had before. By September, we'd established new routines that acknowledged our changed circumstances while building toward sustainable futures. Jessica enrolled at a Miami private school under increased security protocols, but with counseling support to help her process her parents' crimes. Michael remained in Tampa with family members better equipped to handle his anger and confusion. James and I began traveling together for the first time in decades, visiting properties across South Florida to assess damage from the twins' mismanagement, while reconnecting as partners rather than adversaries. Our conversations gradually shifted from crisis management to future planning, though both of us remained cautious about assuming permanent reconciliation. The Blackwood Foundation, dormant during the twins' conspiracy, was reactivated with expanded focus on supporting families affected by elder abuse and financial exploitation. Our experience had taught us how sophisticated family fraud could be, and how little protection existed for elderly relatives targeted by their own children, standing in our renovated Star Island kitchen where family dinners had once brought us together before ambition and anger tore us apart. I felt the weight of lessons learned through nearly losing everything we'd built. The empire was intact, but the family required constant tending to prevent future fractures. Recovery was possible, but it demanded acknowledging that some relationships might never fully heal, while others could grow stronger through surviving crisis together. December 2025 arrived with Miami's characteristic blend of holiday warmth and perpetual summer. But the Blackwood family gathered for Christmas dinner, carried the weight of a year that had redefined everything we thought we knew about love, loyalty, and forgiveness. Tyler and Madison began serving their federal sentences in November, 12 years for Tyler, 14 for Madison, reflecting the scope of their conspiracy and their leadership roles in defrauding not just our family, but the broader Miami community. Their final letters to James and me were studies in contrasts. Tyler's filled with genuine remorse and growing understanding of the pain he'd caused. Madison's maintaining defiant justification for actions she still characterized as protecting family interests. "I loved you both," Tyler wrote from federal prison in Coleman, Florida. "I loved you so much that I convinced myself stealing from you was somehow protecting you. I can't explain how my thinking became so twisted, but I'm working with counselors here to understand how I lost my way so completely." Madison's correspondence remained focused on legal appeals and maintaining her innocence of intentional wrongdoing. Her letters read like legal briefs, filled with technical justifications for actions she framed as good faith efforts to manage family assets during a crisis. The psychological evaluations required by federal sentencing had diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features, clinical terms for someone incapable of accepting responsibility for harming others. James and I spent Christmas morning at Woodlawn Cemetery, standing before the headstone that had marked my supposed grave for over 10 years. We decided to leave the memorial intact as a reminder of how badly families could fracture when communication failed and pride prevented honest conversations about difficult problems. Catherine Elizabeth Blackwood. James read aloud from the inscription our children had chosen. "Beloved wife and mother, forever in our hearts. They got that part right, at least. You were always in my heart, even when I thought you were gone forever. Our grandchildren's adjustment continued with mixed success. Jessica had thrived academically at her new Miami school, channeling her intelligence and resilience into honor roll performance and leadership in student government. Her therapy sessions with Dr. Vasquez had helped her process the complex emotions surrounding her parents' imprisonment and her grandmother's resurrection. "I want to study law," Jessica announced during our Christmas dinner at the Star Island mansion. "Not to get Mom and Dad out of prison, but to help other families who get hurt by people they trust. What happened to us happens to lots of families, and someone needs to fight for the victims." Michael remained in Tampa with James's sister, his anger still too raw for regular family contact. His therapy focused on managing rage and developing healthy relationships with adults after his trust had been shattered by his mother's betrayal. Occasional phone calls suggested gradual progress, but rebuilding that relationship would require years of patient effort. The business recovery had exceeded our most optimistic projections. Blackwood Properties' reputation, initially damaged by scandal, had actually strengthened as the community recognized us as victims rather than perpetrators. Several major clients had increased their business with us, viewing our survival of internal betrayal as evidence of institutional strength rather than weakness. Your family's experience has become a cautionary tale that's helping other Miami families protect themselves, Robert T. Chen explained during our year-end legal review. 3 other elderly clients have asked us to evaluate their estate, planning after seeing how sophisticated family fraud can be. The Blackwood Foundation's expanded mission had attracted significant community support from families who'd experienced similar betrayals. Our grants now funded legal aid for elder abuse victims, therapeutic services for families navigating internal crime, and educational programs teaching professional communities to recognize signs of financial exploitation. Dr. Vasquez's research on family betrayal trauma had been enhanced by our willingness to participate in case studies that could help other families navigate similar crises. Our experience had contributed to academic understanding of how grief and desperation could corrupt family relationships, leading to criminal behavior that destroyed everyone involved. Your story illustrates how quickly love can become manipulation when people convince themselves that harmful actions serve good purposes. Dr. Vasquez observed during one of our final formal therapy sessions. Tyler and Madison genuinely believed they were protecting family interests, even while they were destroying them. James's health had improved dramatically once the stress of false accusations and family conflict was removed. His blood pressure had stabilized, his cognitive function had returned to baseline levels, and his depression had lifted sufficiently that medication was no longer necessary. Physical therapy had restored strength lost during months of legal crisis, and he'd resumed active management of company operations. Our marriage had evolved into something deeper and more honest than our original relationship. The luxury of time had allowed us to address underlying issues that had contributed to our problems before my disappearance. Couples therapy had taught us communication skills that made conflict resolution possible, rather than destructive. We're not the same people who fell in love 47 years ago. James reflected as we watched sunset paint Miami's skyline from our waterfront terrace. We're not even the same people who built this empire together. But maybe that's good. Maybe we needed to become different people to build something better. The legal resolution of our case had established precedents that would help protect other families from similar schemes. Federal prosecutors had developed new protocols for recognizing document fabrication in elder abuse cases. Medical boards had strengthened oversight of psychological evaluations used in competency proceedings. Banking regulations had been updated to make offshore account fraud more difficult to execute. As 2025 drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the profound lessons our family's near destruction had taught about resilience, forgiveness, and the complexity of love. Tyler and Madison remained our children despite their betrayal, deserving compassion, even while serving just consequences for their choices. Our grandchildren needed protection from their parents, mistakes while maintaining connections to family, history, and identity. The Empire James and I had built in our youth had survived its greatest threat not through financial strength or legal protection, but through the power of truth to overcome lies and the determination of love to outlast betrayal. We'd learned that families could survive almost anything if they maintained commitment to honesty, accountability, and patience with each other's imperfections. Standing on our terrace as Miami's lights reflected across Biscayne Bay, watching the city we'd helped build sparkling in the tropical night, I understood that our true legacy wasn't measured in properties owned or wealth accumulated, but in the values we'd demonstrated through crisis and the relationships we'd fought to preserve, despite overwhelming pressure to abandon them.